Welcome to A State of Mind. This is Julian Royce. Today's episode is a great one, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. But first, I want to speak to the coronavirus, which is currently occupying much of our individual and collective attentions and energies. It is having a massive impact. I am recording this on Sunday, March 15th. Just received word that the city of Boulder is closing down all its restaurants tomorrow. So a lot of massive changes, and there's a lot of fear and anxiety. And I can really feel that, the kind of collective energy. Going to the supermarket, the grocery store, and seeing the bare aisles is disturbing. And on the other hand, I have made eye contact and smiled and talked with strangers as I've gone out and about, and that's been really heartwarming. So I see a lot of people responding with a sense of kindness, and that's wonderful to see, because I think that's one of the best things we can do as an individual, is really just slow down and be kind and considerate of others. Yeah, it's an amazing time to be in, and I hope that we all come out of this okay, and that maybe there'll be some positives in the long run that come from something like this, though it's very difficult right now. And one suggestion that I have, and I did this myself earlier in the day, is to just sit down and do nothing for a few moments, and feel yourself, and if this makes sense to you, feeling the collective energy that's happening, and just being with it, breathing with it, feeling your body, and not trying to get rid of whatever's there, whatever anxiety or fear or a sense of needing to do something but not knowing what it is, this kind of anxious energy. Just being with it and giving space and listening without getting 100% sucked into it can be really helpful. And know that you're not alone. Know that a lot of people are feeling this way, and this is a big deal for a lot of people. So I thank you for listening, and I wish everyone who is listening all the best, and that we can all get through this together. And if you are a listener to this podcast, please consider making a donation or posting it on your social media account, letting friends know about it. All those kinds of things really make a big difference, and helps me to keep doing what I'm doing. And I really see the value in this podcast on a personal level, when I interact with guests, and when I get good feedback from people or constructive feedback from people. But I am hoping to make this more sustainable for myself. You can imagine if you were listening to this and we were in a big room of people, even though with the coronavirus we're not supposed to gather in big rooms of people, and I were to pass around a hat and ask everyone, to contribute what you can, and maybe you give $1 or $2 or $10, and then you'll get to hear this program. A lot of work goes into creating something like this, so take a moment to consider contributing. You can go to patreon.com/A State of Mind. And now to today's episode. My guest today goes by the name Kuthumi, and he is an extraordinary gentleman. It's really honored to have him come over and talk to me. And he has worked with an indigenous group basically in the Amazon, working with plant spirit medicine, ayahuasca, and things like that. Tobacco is another substance he talks about in our conversation. And he has really sought to study and honor the traditional ways in which these medicines and ceremonies are done, and the healing and empowerment that comes from them. And I think he has a really good message for all of us, especially those interested in things like shamanism and plant spirit medicine and psychedelics. He is a medicine carrier and lineage holder for the Napu Same group in the Amazonian Ecuadorian rainforest. Apologize for probably not saying that correctly. And I will post links about that community and for his personal website, which is runaambi.com. So check out the episode webpage for those links. And one of the things he really emphasized was having respect and care for the traditions from which these sacred medicines come from and the context in which they're used. And I really appreciated that. And it reminds me of the Buddhist lineages, which I am aware of, and there's a difference between being a practitioner and being a lineage holder. And in the case of Buddhism, the lineages go back to the time of the Buddha. And in the case of these indigenous people in Central or South America, I don't think there's a particular figure that they trace back to, but they go back for thousands of years, in a similar way to Buddhism and yoga, and a lot of ancient traditions operate in this way, and the knowledge is passed down, and there's a reason for that. And so it's good to know about that and to honor and respect that and to take care with the language that we use. One of the things he discusses is how in these cultures it would be absurd to self-proclaim yourself a shaman. And he discusses that a little bit. He discusses his own training and the many years he has spent going down there and the work he's doing now, and the potential for sacred medicines like ayahuasca to really transform and heal people in deep, fundamental ways. And so, without further ado, I bring you Kuthumi. Hello, I'm here today with Kuthumi.
Hey, how you doing, Julian?
Good. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. Appreciate it. Yeah.
I'm just gonna hear a little bit more about your life. How would you introduce yourself? I know that can be a tough question.
Yeah, there's so many different aspects about myself. I guess the simple way, my name is Kuthumi. I come from Ecuador. I'm half Colombian. Was born and raised in Ecuador. I'm partially indigenous and what is known as mestizo people. My tradition comes from the Incas and from the Quechuas, which is mostly the Amazon region of the Ecuadorian side. There's also Quechuas up in the Andes in the highlands, but my tradition is from the Amazon. I moved to the States when I was 18, so I was pretty much raised in Ecuador. Yeah.
Okay.
Went to school and all that.
What brought you to move here?
Ooh, another big question. I don't know. It's just life. My parents got married here actually in New York. My older brother was born in New York, and then when he was 2, they moved back to Ecuador. My mom is from Colombia, so they actually moved to Ecuador with my dad. What I understand from them, living in the U.S. 45 years ago, it was challenging. They didn't have a family and stuff, and we're very family oriented, so they needed support with my brother. That's why they went back, and they settled back in Ecuador, and I was raised there. And then when my brother turned 18, he decided to move back to the U.S. And my mother came and visited him, and my parents got divorced recently. So was a piece around my mom like, hey, life is changing for me. Do you want to move to the U.S.? And I was like, yeah, why not? I was 18, had just finished high school. So I was like, yeah, why not?
Big change.
So we moved. My brother was here already with his family. And we just came and, began a new life. And and that was Houston, which is an interesting city too.
Texas. I've heard Houston's one of the most polluted in the country.
To be honest, I don't know. It might be. It might be.
And what are you up to now?
What I'm up to now, as I was sharing before with you, I'm about to finish my master's program in Europa.
Right. Counseling psychology.
Counseling psychology, clinical counseling. Finishing it up in another 2.5 months. And kind of like just open for new things, new beginnings. Awesome. And see how I'm going to project myself in that environment. Kind of like bringing my cultural pieces and my cultural background into counseling and trying to see how do I merge them together in a very inclusive way. The Western side and the traditional pieces from my culture, there's a lot of clashes. It's a little challenging to navigate in respectful ways to my tradition and also in these Western ways.
Right.
So
well, that's a huge topic, I feel like.
Yeah.
It's like more traditional ways in the modern world and America.
Yeah.
So what is your tradition? How would you talk about that?
So I'm an ayahuasquero. Basically, we work with traditional plants, but the main medicine we use is ayahuasca. Ayahuasca, it's a combination of two different plants. There are different traditions in South America. In my tradition, we use ayahuasca, which is the vine, and we mix it with chalipanga. So we cook it for an amount of time, and that the brew is what we drink in ceremony. The medicine comes into your system and kind of like empowers and heightens what is already in your system. For us in medicine, the medicine doesn't really add anything to you. It's only makes it visible where you already are at. So it kind of like meets you where you are. So there's a lot of practices around it and the way we hold it together in ceremony and in the communities for healing. Part of our tradition, we do something that's called limpia. The limpias are, the translation for that in English will be to clean. To clean. But like putting it more in the context of a Western perspective will be more like a spiritual healing or energy cleansing kind of a thing. So basically, as we drink medicine and we sit in ceremony, which is to imbibe the sacredness of the earth, what we call Pachamama, to imbibe that inside of us and also to the space, imbibe the spirits. We work with a lot of different spirits from nature. And so creating that sacredness so that the spirit can come in and do the healing for us. For us, a lot of the challenges, and for me, my own experience, a lot of the challenges that we have in general in life and also a lot of the challenges around our Western culture is that we are separated from spirit. So we're disregarding spirit from our lives.
You feel like we're more separate from spirit?
Yeah. Like in the old ways for many of the indigenous people, not just my tradition, but in the world, when you were going to build a house, you come to the land, you offer ceremony, you ask permission, and then you build the house. If there's going to be an event that is big, you do the same way. There's always this relationship that is happening between the land and the spirits and yourself. So you're always cultivating that piece of respect to the spirit, When we do ceremony and also when we eat, there's pieces around like creating like a little spirit plate, like you're offering food to the spirit. So
there's like a give and a take, an offering.
And there's always this acknowledgement that the spirit is present, So it's that relationship that is happening and how do you develop the relationship to spirit, and the different ways that the spirit manifests in our physical forms, right? And I feel that in our Western ways, we have lost a lot of that. I think many old traditions had it, and somehow we have become so materialized in many ways that we lost that connection. We just come, build the house, do so many things that are disregarding the natural laws of nature. Yeah. And it's always about taking. For me, my experience, and it's very little of giving back. And so coming from my traditional understanding, it's we want to repair that connection. So when we do the limpias, which means cleaning, it's like we're cleaning what is in between you and me, like the pieces that are not letting us see each other for who we are. So we're like cleansing. And the same thing with the spirit. We're cleansing our relationship to different spirits, right? So if I want to connect to, like my tradition, we work a lot with Puma. Puma, the Puma spirit.
Is that like a jaguar?
Yeah.
That
will be the jaguar. Exactly. Yeah. Puma is the actual Quechua name.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
It will be the jaguar. If you want to connect to it, there's a lot of process like where you're healing and then you're inviting the spirit. Spirits approach you as you're like allowing yourself to heal yourself, which means like you're settling your system, and it's not so much about wanting, but more like sharing, kind of like being present with each other. Then the spirit gets closer to you, and that's how we work with the spirit. So like we're cleansing ourselves so that we can like have a clear connection between us and the spirit that we're working with.
It's beautiful.
And it will be the same thing with people. We want to clear our relationships. And that's another piece that I've been contemplating, which is beautiful. We do a lot of family work, transgenerational. Because for us as well, in my experience, once you step into the spiritual realm, there's no sense of the space and time. Things are just happening in a different rhythm, different dimensions that are hard to like put it into concepts in this physical form. And so there's a lot of healing that is happening from all your relationships that you've had and you still have. So in my tradition, there's a big reverence and honor to the elders that are still present with us, even though they're not physically. You're still part of their lineage. We're still connected. There's like this network of communication that is still happening from previous family members and all that. So like you're still cleansing, we're still healing or those pieces with them as well. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you just named like so many things I want to ask you more about, but this intergenerational piece feels so important. And it feels like, well, I know a lot of traditional cultures really honor their ancestors. They have a sense of where they live, where they've come from, where their children are going to live, traditionally speaking, and connecting with grandparents, great-grandparents. And in America, in the modern world, or at least in this country, it's just like people move around so much. People immigrate here from all over the world, and then you kind of lose touch. Like we kind of live in this bubble that feels separated from the past. And I've had this conversation with a lot of people. I'll ask them like, "Oh, where do you come from?" They'll name a state. Where were your parents from? Another state. Where were your grandparents from? Maybe from Europe. Where were your great-grandparents from? Oh, I'm not sure. Northern Europe or Norway or England. But if when I go to England, because I have family in England, and I talk to family there, it's like, oh, my great-grandfather lived in this village, and it's this sense of continuity and connection with the past. And and I think we have a lot of intergenerational trauma. Mm-hmm. And I think what you're speaking to can be a way to start to heal that.
Yeah, I think it's so important, as you said, here in the U.S., in my experience in the last few years that I've been living here, there's a lot of truth to what you said in the sense of like people have lost their roots in many ways. They're not connected to where they're coming from, like family history, traditions, even place, location, and so that I think that's a big piece of a lot of the challenges that we see here in the U.S. Like that is that sense that ground rootness where we're like nurturing ourselves from like earth, and the connection from where we come from is lacking. We're sort of like lost.
Right.
And I think that plays out into a lot of the challenges that we have here, and being able to heal that in different ways. It's so important. And it's a personal work, and at the same time, it's a community work. It's a community piece too.
So in your tradition, do you feel like your ancestors, grandparents, great-grandparents are still, you can still access them or get in touch with them? They're still present in some way?
Yeah, even for me, I'm a mestizo, which means, I'm partially white, partially indigenous. There's a lot more whiteness through my mother's side. Recent generations that come from Spain. My father's side, still mestizo, but he's more generations coming from Ecuador, from different regions. But still, both of them have become, their families became so modernized, like so Western, that even, my indigenous side through both of them, because both of them are mestizo, it was lost too. So, there's a lot of indigenous species that are weaved into our Latin culture. So those have always been there, but we're not fully aware of like what is what. It's like all so mixed in so many different ways. And me being able to leave the Ecuador, and be here in the U.S. is when I'm, when I start noticing pieces of like myself. It's like, wow, this is more actually coming from this place.
So coming to America, you became more aware of your background and culture, because all of a sudden you're in a different culture. And then,
definitely. Yeah. I started doing a lot of the, we call it curanderos, which is more traditional practices of learning how to heal with plants and energy, and like working with the spirits and all those pieces around that when I was 12. But then I left when I was 18. I actually went traveling for a few different places, and I went back to Ecuador when I was 28. So that was about maybe 12 years ago. And that's when I was like, consciously going back to like recover a lot of the pieces that were taken away through colonization. I mean, all those pieces are like, and I'm still going through like a very strong grieving process where the impact of colonization in my family lineage was like really, really hard, So I managed to, I have a lot of family and indigenous friends from Ecuador. So I kind of like went back to them, kind of like asking and really reconnecting to those pieces that I have lost and allowing them to guide me, being invited. That's another piece that is important, that we're not going, even me being mestizo, I'm not going back to tradition or indigenous tradition I'm like trying to take, but like asking and participating in a way that feels that I'm respectful and I'm being invited to be part of them,
That's beautiful.
So I did that for a long while, and I found the community that I work now, and it's a spiritual adoption, basically.
Spiritual adoption?
Yeah.
Because you didn't, is that because you didn't grow up in it?
Yeah, this is not my, I wasn't born with this tradition.
So what is the name of this community?
They're coming from the Quechuas, which is a larger tribe. There are many families on the Quechuas. There is actually a huge population. And then
where do they live?
They live in the region of Napo. In Ecuador, there's this, in Ecuador. Well, the Quechuas come all the way from Cusco, all the way down through the Andes into the Amazon, and actually extend all the way up, I think, a little closer to Colombia as well. And then they mix with different traditions as well. So, and then extends also to, the Brazilian side. So Quechuas are pretty spread out. There are different Quechuas families. Through colonization, a lot of the Quechua people had to change a little bit of their dialects to be able to keep protecting from Spanish people that actually was learning Quechua and trying to get more out of them.
Really?
So they're
so changing the dialect helped.
Yeah, changing the language so that they can communicate without having Spanish people know what were they communicating or talking about, trying to protect their families and trying to protect, their traditions and all that pieces. So it was a survival mechanism. So there are different Quechuas now that they can talk to each other, but it's not like the same. There's like different things that they don't fully understand each other.
Right.
So my tradition, the tradition that I was adopted in, it's from the Amazon, the Napo region. The family is called the Andy Vargas family, and it's the community of Cuyaloma.
Yeah.
So I've been working with them for 11 years.
Wow, so a specific family.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Well, that's usually how it is. I mean, when you get adopted, like that family takes you in, and that wasn't my intention. I just wanted to recover a lot of my indigenous pieces and my culture and like really connecting to, we call it the Andes cosmology, which is the understanding that we have about life. And that's pretty much spread through, South America and the Andes region.
The understanding that what?
Andes cosmology is the understanding of life, like the way we perceive life.
Oh, okay.
And that's it's a shared experience among the people from the Andes. Might change a little from culture to culture within our, the subcultures that we have, but it's pretty much the same. It's the concept of Pachamama, which is Mother Earth, and then we have Pachacama, which is the cosmic mother. And from that, there is a lot of understanding of like the three different worlds and how do we navigate through the worlds and
what are the three different worlds? So
you have the terrain, the underground, and then we have the spiritual, right? So you have the Puma, which is this little right here.
Oh, yeah. You got it right there in your wrist.
So yeah, for us, the Puma is the spirit that balance the spiritual realm and the physical realm. Oh. So it's the in-between.
The intermediary.
Yeah.
Well, so that's fascinating that you're saying that, because there is a philosopher, thinker named Sam Harris that I'm a fan of. I listen to a lot of his stuff, and he recently shared about it had been like 20 or 30 years since he had done any psychedelics. I think like 30, because he's like older now. And he took a large amount of mushrooms and sat in a dark room, psychedelic psilocybin mushrooms. And he said that he was visited by the Puma, by this black jaguar. But he was totally surprised by that. He wasn't expecting that at all. And he had this whole interaction with that spirit, which was an amazing coming from him, because he's an atheist and doesn't really believe in this kind of spiritual world in the same way that maybe other people do. So it was interesting. Yeah.
It's the manifestation of a spirit, coming through different plant medicines.
So the Puma is the intermediary.
Yeah.
And so we have like an underworld, What's the name of that?
So you have the and then you have the condor,
Condor. Yeah.
and then you have the snake.
Yeah.
Right. So you have the three, the underworld, the midworld, the terrenal, and then the high plane. And as I was mentioning before, a lot of the work that we do is stepping into the spirit realm, as curanderos or ayahuasqueros or medicine people. And when we do that, the puma is one of the main elements, the main spirit that comes through to be able to have a balance in between. A lot of people, or at least my understanding here in the West, a lot of people see the spiritual realm as something divine, something like like the heavens, kind of like that Christian
like angels,
peace, angels, and all that. And the reality is that there is a lot of stuff that is very, very, it's like the same thing there. It's like there's spirits that are very dense and heavy, and some take advantage of you as well. And there's spirits that are tricksters, and so it all depends where you're navigating, which places,
So, when you say spirit realm, it's not all rainbows and unicorns. It's there's some dark spirits or negative or positive.
Yeah, I mean, we have down in Ecuador, in South America in general, we have something that is called brujos. It might have a negative connotation up here because the translation will be like a witch. But for us, brujos are people that still work with medicine, different medicines. We're still using Mother Earth properties, to access the spiritual realm. But you turn into a brujo when you're using it for personal gains or like very unconscious things for manipulating people, things like that, which you can, So again, you're stepping into the spiritual realm using medicines to, have access to things that you can, manipulate people in whatever ways you want.
Oh, wow. So basically people wanting power.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, that will be somebody that we would call a brujo, somebody who's not really aware of what, that person is doing, and just using the sacredness that we have as a tradition to cause harm or produce harm for somebody else. Because like when you're greedy, like if you want just power, the impact on somebody else is heavy.
It's like karma or impact.
It's when you want power, it's like it's this wanting. It's like, and when you're wanting, then you're not aware of boundaries. Like you're trespassing, or you might trespass people, right? So you might not be aware of it, but like when you're collecting, for you to be able to have, other people have to let go. You see what I'm saying? Because we're sharing a space. We're not just alone here. So power would be seen as a way of like being a brujo, because like taking too much, then those pieces are landing in a disrespectful way for somebody else. So you're affecting or impacting somebody in a way that is not nice,
Right. And is the main medicine that you're using is ayahuasca, right?
Ayahuasca, yeah.
Do you want to speak to your own experiences with that? Is that...
Well, there's so much.
I guess one question I have that maybe other people do too, like I've heard that it's often recommended to do a certain cleanse, a certain diet before you...
it all depends on the tradition who you're sitting with. Okay. For us, and for me, medicine, and I just wanted to mention this before, because there's always these talks about psychedelics and plant medicine. Coming from a traditional piece, for us, is a plant medicine. We would never refer it as psychedelic. Psychedelic is a Western term that has a negative connotation in general, and I know it's been trying to be changed and reformed, right? Depends
who you talk to, but exactly. I know what you're saying. Yeah.
But it's that sense of, it's sort of like an artificial... experience.
It could be made in a lab.
Right, exactly. For us, ayahuasca, you're accessing layers of your consciousness by stepping into the spirit realm in a way that what you're experiencing is your own reality. So you're not making it up.
Oh, wow.
Right? So putting it in the context of a psychedelic, you might step into that place of like invalidating the experience of that person who's doing ayahuasca, and also invalidating the existence of the spirit,
Well, I think that's an important point, because if someone takes, some kind of substance and then they have some experience or they get real excited, and then someone else might be like, "Oh, you're just tripping, man."
Exactly.
Like that, that expression, or like,
yeah.
And what you're saying is going into this experience, it's a reality. It's something real.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah, for us, we're stepping into what's actually happening. The layers. As we clean the barriers in between us, we get to see more, right? So what we get to see is not just our physical connection, but the spirit realm that is all present here all the time. We're just not aware of it, right? So that's why for us it's important, and for me it's important to name that piece that it's not, from an indigenous perspective, it's not a psychedelic. It's a medicine plant. It's something sacred for us, and we want to keep it that way. And the experiences that I've had, I've done it for 11 years so far. On regular basis. I did ayahuasca. I got in contact with ayahuasca when I was 12. That was the first time.
Oh, wow. So you did grow up with that.
Yeah. When I started doing curanderismo, that was part of it. Yeah. Not in the concentrated form. It was in a very diluted form, but we'll have it. We'll drink it as a tea. It was a way of developing already with the plant and other plants and medicine around it. So, yeah, it's been present in my life ever since I'm 12 on a conscious level. I started drinking in the very traditional, condensed, visionary ways when I was about 29.
Okay. So when you
29.
When you were 12 years old, how was that? Was that part of your family that you're growing up with?
Well, no. I met my first shaman. Well, my mother, it's always, and my father, it's part of a culture. They had friends and family, and we used to go to fire ceremonies or go up to lakes and do ceremonies and stuff and different things with shamans. So it's, as I said, it's whipped into the Ecuadorian culture, but it's not 100%, because we also have Catholicism and Christianism and all these other pieces that have been brought in. But yeah, they introduced me to my first shaman. Her name was Violeta, a woman from Chile. And yeah, she took me in. I worked with her for about a couple of years. I used to travel to a place called Baños, which is kind of like the doorway to the Amazon, a few hours away from the city. So I would go down once a month or twice a month for the weekends and spend time with her. And she used to have people coming to her for healings and stuff. So one of the things that she would do will be take people up to a place that they're called the altars. They're two Andes mountains that they look like an altar.
Altar.
Yeah, and it's a sacred place. We call them apus, which is the spirit from the mountains. So we used to take these people there for ceremonies and things like that. So I was in an apprentice place with her at the age of 12.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So we'll drink it, and at least my memories back then, it will just get me really connected to nature, this sense of pulsating with nature at once, not visions or nothing altering my state of consciousness. It was more like a sense, a sense of relaxation and really connecting and having more the sense of the spirit around, connecting to the trees and the fire and the wind and
beautiful.
Yeah.
And so then in your life, it sounds like you later in life kind of went back to seek out this knowledge or this way in more depth.
Yeah.
There's something in you that was calling out for that, maybe, or wanting that?
Yeah, it's always been part of my life. Okay. In many ways, the Western culture played out a lot for me as well, right? So when I left Ecuador and moved to the U.S., started going to college and getting my life here together, kind of getting more into the habit of the U.S., then I wasn't fully happy here. The fast life of cities is not the best thing for me, so I tend to move to places smaller, like Boulder, So I ended up going to India for 1.5 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I just bought a one-way ticket, went there, came back a year and a half later.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's a long time to be there.
I know. And
what were you doing out there?
I went to different places. I went, like most people do when they go there, get into yoga and, meditation, and did several Vipassana meditations, got into the Osho community for a while.
Okay.
That was a big part of my life for a while. And then kind of traveling, meeting different gurus and teachers, and kind of just allowing myself to nourish, from all the Mother India. There is so much beauty and mysticism there.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry. So yeah, that was a piece for me. And after going back, because I went back to India several times in those 10 years, the last time I went back, there was a moment that I reached to this core moment. It was go back to Ecuador. And life sort of brought me back, and and that's where I met my elder, my community, and yeah, and then my life kind of like from that Western life where I was like trying to like fit in my experience of spirit through Hinduism and Buddhism. All of a sudden something flipped and I reconnected back to my roots, and it was like, just go back.
Yeah.
And within a couple of weeks that I was in Ecuador, I decided to go to the Amazon and just let myself guide it, and that's when I met my elder, and then introduced me to the whole family. Had my first ceremony, which blew my head, like really bad. Like,
what was
really,
that like?
Really strong. It was strong in the sense that I lost all my body functions.
Jeez.
Like I was out of control, to say. My youngest elder, who was not an ayahuasquero back then, he was in his process of learning. He was embracing me from behind my back through the whole night for about 6 hours, because my arms and legs were just moving like crazy. From the outside, my shaman and his wife and people in the community were a little concerned about me. But every time I came back from my journey, I would open my eyes, looked at them, and I had this amazing smile, and I felt in this state of blissfulness. I felt like so good. And I went through a lot of stuff. I went through rebirth. I came out of my mother's vagina again. Literally, It was like this, like experience of like being reborn.
Wow. Yeah.
I was screaming, rolling on the ground, and crying, growling. It was like intense. It was beautiful and very intense. So when I finished the next day, talked to them, my shaman was like, "Hey, are you doing anything else, any drugs in general, like anything that might have like clashed with the medicine?" I was like, "Hey, no, like nothing." The only piece, I had just come back from India, and I did this 3 months breath work training. Wow. So a lot of breath work. Yeah. So I don't know if my system was just like super fully open, and when I had the medicine, it was just like...
I'm sure that makes a difference.
Yeah. So that was the only thing. Other than that, I hadn't done anything back then. So yeah, it took me about a month to integrate that journey.
Wow. That's a very significant journey and experience.
Yeah. So I went back after a month, and I sat with them for 3 times, 3 days in a row, and again reshaped my life. And when we finished the 3rd time, I went up to my elder. His name is Luis, and I'm like, "Hey, Luis, like, I want to learn. I want to learn so that I can heal myself." My intention was not to learn to facilitate or hold ceremonies. My intention was like to regain my culture. To go through my process of grieving, what I have lost. Yeah. To be grateful for them to like allow me to like learn through their ways, And he just looked at me and he's like, "Okay." And then I kept coming back, and it was so interesting because a year later I went through a really, really intense process through medicine, and when I finished my another 3 ceremonies, which was actually the same thing. Yeah. 3 ceremonies were exactly the same process, like the continuity.
And 3 days in a row?
Yeah.
Oh, that's intense. So for 3 days in a row, you're taking ayahuasca in ceremony.
Yeah. And that was interesting because I've never had that continuity back then. And when I came out, I went up to Luis, and he just looked at me and he smiled, and he was like, "You're ready to begin now." Yeah. It took me a year to begin the apprenticeship. For me, I was like, I'm already learning. Yeah. It was a year when you're ready to like begin.
And how old were you then?
I was maybe 29 or 30.
Okay.
Yeah, that was like a year and a half after.
Oh.
Yeah. and that's when I started learning, and it's been a long journey,
Yeah. What is that like, being an apprentice to someone like that? Is it just different for each person?
I'm assuming, there is not like a specific formality. The more respect and the more gentleness I show on my side in approaching their ways, the more they let me come in. Because they're very protective. Most indigenous people, because of the history that we have, we're very guarding, the sacredness. Yeah. And it's important for us, as a way of surviving in these Western waters, right? So back then, my lenses of seeing life were still very white, very Western, coming from, my mestizo whiteness. And it took me a long while to sort of like shift in that, and through their guidance and through the medicine to come into this place where I could really, understand a lot more of that. My indigenous roots, to really understand what sacred means for us, and how we navigate through the sacredness. And the more I was doing that, the more they were opening their house to me, the more they were opening their community. And and that's how, and it's been a journey, it's been 11 years. They hand me down their lineage about 3.5 years ago.
Oh, wow.
I didn't want it. It was an intense process.
You didn't want it?
Yeah, I mean, because, as I said, that wasn't my intention. For me, ayahuasca, it's an intense medicine.
Absolutely.
It's dense, it's heavy, it's mother, it's earth. For my tradition, it's very jungle-like, right? So it's like a heavy thing to move. And through my own learning, it was like, wow, this is a lot to hold for myself. It's like, how can I hold it for somebody else? So I had a lot of doubts about myself and whether I wanted to do it or not. And, I came up to him several times like, hey, Luis, this is not for me. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I love you as a family. I want to stay here, but like, no. And he's like, just wait. Just wait. And eventually, the medicine started coming in a way that I understood, or my understanding with the medicine flipped into place where my rejection was like, oh, this is a lot of work, moving into this is happening no matter what. You see what I'm saying? So it became not 100% effortless, but it became a lot lighter.
Like a surrender?
Surrendering into it. Well, I realized that a lot of my resistance was like resistance not just to give the medicine, but also to let it fully embrace me, like to become medicine myself. Oh, wow. There was a lot of fears still around it. I had a lot of blockages that I needed to work through, and the more I allowed the medicine to come in and allow actually my whole system become the medicine, there was a moment that it was very clear that it was like, it became more effortless, So then I drink medicine, and before many years ago, I couldn't even, get out from my seat. I will be like a little baby, puking or crying and going through my journeys.
And puking is common, right? When people...
Yeah, it's very common. It's a way of cleansing, I'll talk more about it later. But and eventually, now I drink medicine. I'm usually walking around and helping people and doing things. And, I get a little, we call it la borrachera or la mareación, which means like to get dizzy or to get drunk, that feeling that you cannot handle yourself. So most people go through that. And the more you do medicine, and the more the medicine becomes yourself, like the more you become sacredness itself, like you become the sacredness in the ceremony, right? The more the medicine works with you, and it becomes, in a way, effortless. You're like navigating through it. You feel a little heavy sometimes, but it's, you go around and you're not alone, That was another piece that came through, understanding that I wasn't alone, So when I finally took, the responsibility to carry this tradition, was understanding that as I'm carrying it, I'm not alone, The way I could see it or explain it, when you have like a network, like a pyramid or something, and, there's a lot of people above you, like these networking companies where like everybody's making money from everybody. So you got all these people above you, and you might be the last person, and you might feel that you're alone. But in reality, you're connected to every single person before you. So
like a web.
It's like a web, yeah. So you're connected to all your elders. So when I was invited to handed down the tradition, that's basically what happens. And I understood that, it's a process that happens by invitation. There's a lot of people that self-proclaim themselves medicine people or shamans, or,
Right.
And for us, at least, that's very disrespectful because, it's not something that you proclaim yourself.
So someone needs to invite you and tell you that, or...
Yeah. Well, it's a tradition, right? So you need to first be welcome. You need to be trained, and that training could take years. It's not a fixed thing. It could take 2 years for somebody. It could take 20 for somebody else. It all depends on your personal process and how much you embrace the tradition and how respectful you approach the medicine. So yeah, and when you're ready, finally, that's when, your elder come up to you and is like, you're ready, and it's basically an invitation, like, you're ready, let me hand it to you. And
Yeah.
and then when I was handing the medicine, it took me 3 years or 3.5 years to finally be given full consent to go and do my own thing. So even when I was ready with them, they were like, okay, you're ready, but you're not ready to go alone.
Oh,
Like, you're ready to work with us,
Right.
but you're still like, embracing the medicine and the tradition.
So at some point they gave you the go-ahead to lead ceremonies on your own?
Yeah, well, they gave me the go-ahead, first of all, to drink on my own, which was a beautiful piece. I had never had medicine on my own. So I had medicine on my own for about a year, and then I went back again, and that's when they gave me the blessings to, like, work maybe like 2-3 people, and I did that, here and then I went back, and yeah, that was the last time I went back, and they were like, oh, here you go, you're ready. And I'm still, I'm a baby ayahuasquero, I'm still learning so many, and I don't think that ever ends. We're still learning every single day.
Yeah.
And learning my relationship and developing relationship to myself and to spirit and to the plants and to people,
Right.
So yeah.
That's fascinating. So how often would you be taking the medicine?
When we're down there, we take it whenever it's people requesting it. People that come, there's foreigners that are coming. Also, whenever there's something happening in the community, if there's like, we want to do Olympia or a cleansing for the community, we take medicine. If there's anything that is happening specifically, like a newborn or projects that are happening, that's another time that we take medicine. So, it could be once a month, could be like pretty much like every other day for like 2-3 weeks nonstop.
Oh, wow.
So it's hard to tell as well. It
just depends.
Yeah, it all depends. It's not taken just because we want to take it. There's always a sacredness piece around it where, like, we understand there's a purpose for it.
There's a purpose and intention.
Yeah, exactly.
Part of what you're describing in this indigenous traditional community, it's like not doing things kind of quote unquote by the book exactly, like following calendar. We take this on the 25th of the month, or you have to come here for X number of years and do X number of things. And it sounds very fluid and organic.
Yeah, it's very fluid. There's certain things, there's certain, from the, Andes cosmology that, we have the equinox and like full moons and like different times, kind of like the same thing, like there's specific times that are seen as more prosperous to do ceremonies and things like that.
Yeah.
So we do guide ourselves through that too, but it's not like a fixed thing. At least in my tradition. There's other indigenous traditions that are more fixed. There's other traditions like in Brazil that are a lot more softer. They're even between us or subcultures, they change between, among us in different ways. My tradition, it's flowy, but also there's certain, structure as well.
Yeah, it's a balance.
Yeah. And, one piece that you asked me about, how to, like the medicine, I forgot what you asked me, but I wanted to respond in this way. It was when you come to ceremony about the diet, the dietas, the diets.
Oh yeah.
So every traditional works differently with medicine.
Okay.
Definitely, there is a need for cleansing and preparing your body, but it all comes down to who you're sitting with, the person who's holding the ceremony. Yeah. Here in the West. From our perspective, there's a misunderstanding what medicine is. People think that medicine is just the brew, it's just like the little thing that you take and that's it, For us, when you come to my community, you drink our medicine, which means you're drinking our spiritual self. Like we're extensions of the medicine. The brew that you're drinking, it's the physical manifestation of the lineage, right? So you're drinking who we are in essence, and we're sharing that with you, right? And that's why it's so important to have respect, because you're not just drinking a glass of water, you're drinking the essence. It's like kind of like you're drinking the blood from people, like so you're sharing their nutrients.
That's fascinating.
So
you're very careful who you would want to
100%.
invite. Okay.
100%. And who you're sitting with too, because literally that's what's happening. The person who prepares the medicine is super important. Like in my community, the shaman, her name is Ines, is the elder. She's the one who handles the medicine. And she will let people come in and help depending on what's happening. but like she's, it's a very matriarchal lineage. She's the one who prepares, and there's a particular way of preparing it, and the way she holds it is very respectful, because when you're cooking it, all your energy goes into it, your relationship to the medicine goes into it, right? So you want to have a good relationship to the plant, right?
I didn't realize it was a woman-led lineage. Yeah. Is that common, or?
I mean, mine is very matriarchal in the sense of, it's Mother Earth, Pachamama. For us, that's the container. And then you have a spirit, within, it's part of the whole creation as well. But Mother is the womb, so we're inside the womb, right? Womb. And the spirit comes inside the womb and, creates who we are, So, I mean, the shamans are leading ceremonies. She also leads ceremonies as well, but it's mostly male who guide the ceremonies of the limpias. She steps in whenever, it's funny because whenever they're not able to handle it, she steps in, She's the container. Like, she's usually behind the scene, kind of like coming around, shaking people around. And she comes up to Luis and Juan, who's the son, is like, hey, be gentle, or hey, do this. Like, she's like really overseeing the whole ceremony. Apparently, you might say that Luis and Juan are like the more active, because like they're like, in a way, like they show people, but she's the one who's behind the whole scene, and she's the one who prepares the medicine. And that's the piece that is important. The medicine we're sharing is coming from that spiritual element that brings all the qualities from the community and from the lineage.
So it's not like just a cookbook recipe. It's like the person, the shaman who actually prepares it is important.
Exactly.
It makes a lot of sense to me.
So the dieta comes along with that. In my tradition, we're not so strict. There's certain guidelines that we follow. But there's some other, like Shipibo from down in Peru, some other Quechuas and some mestizos as well. They have more specific diets, like you have to do this and this and this and prepare like no salt and things like that. And that's totally okay. And that's how that particular tradition and that particular shaman works with the medicine. So based on their own understanding, they know how to handle medicine because of who they are. So for them, it's like, okay, we need to do a specific dieta, But the same dieta would not be applied for another community because that other community will work with the medicine in a totally different way. So that's another piece that is important because, we tend here in the West to make everything like put everything within boxes, right? We want to make it a rule. Everybody has to do this,
Right.
But it's not that way. Every tradition is different. It's important who you're sitting with. There's a lot of people who go down to the Amazon for like a month, 2 months, or probably a year, and they're like, I'm a shaman now. They'll come back and they self-proclaim themselves. And, they learn the logistics, how to like prepare the medicine and how to like maybe handle the buckets and people throwing up all these little things, which are practical things.
Right.
But in reality, like they're not medicine people. They're not. They haven't understood. They haven't understood the sacred piece around it.
Yeah.
And they come here and they hold ceremonies, and in a way, some people are okay. But then when you have somebody who really needs like a strong container, things go out of hand. I mean, there's been cases, people, who died or had like really bad experiences.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
There's been a few.
From ayahuasca?
Yeah. They're a very simple example that happened actually in Netherlands. That was last year, I think it was October. These two guys who spent some time in Peru decided to run ceremonies, but not just ayahuasca. I mean, they do this thing, they call it the warrior retreat. It's like 4 or 5 days, and they mix. I mean, they bring ayahuasca and ivoga and hape and gambo and I mean all the indigenous medicines that are like pretty strong. And the person died from too much.
Is it from? I wonder how they died exactly.
I don't exactly know. I mean, these two guys went to prison and the center got closed. And
oh wow, went to prison.
It's
a good cautionary tale.
Oh yeah, I mean, you have to be cautious where you're sitting with again.
I guess it's part. I mean, people in our modern world taking 10, 12 years to learn something feels like such a long time. And in a traditional culture, that's not. That's how long, like what you're describing.
Totally. Even in my experience, I mean, I've been doing it for 11 years with this tradition. I started when I was 12, and even 11 years, man. I mean, it's very little. I mean, the shamans usually they begin when they're like 6, 7, 8. You know, usually their parents they already know and like, okay, we're gonna start, you know, preparing this little kid, you know, and they grow into those ways and that's how it is. It's like a lifetime journey of learning and also not just learning like it's not just a subject, you know, but it's a way of life. So you're not just learning one thing, but the community itself, it's weaved into the medicine, right?
Yeah.
So you're not learning one class; everything is like part of the whole piece,
right?
You know. So yeah, expecting Western people together in like 2 years be shamans is like totally not realistically, you know? And that's why many of them they start to proclaim themselves shamans. You know,
they don't want to take the time.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and I've met white people and Western people who are shamans, who've been handed down traditions.
Right, it's not like a racial thing.
Oh yeah, and they're beautiful, and I honor them, I respect them. So we're in no way we are against people coming and learning, but you need to take the time, you know.
Yeah.
And again, it's not something you decide. Once you're ready, you get invited, and then you're invited.
It's really similar, I think, in the Buddhist traditions. You know, it takes time and. There's a lineage and there's a transmission and there's a
exactly.
But it's kind of easy. I don't know, common for people to go on a few retreats and then they're ready to start teaching. And it's not like that's not helpful or invalid, but it's not the same as someone who's a lineage holder who's had that transmission.
Totally, exactly. I think with medicine, what dangerous around medicine is that the reality it's intense. It's an intense journey. And if you come from a space where there's a lot of trauma, for instance, or there's a lot of, like if you have a little bit of psychosis or like bipolar or epilepsy or like more heavy body and psychological experience, right? And then you go and do medicine, the medicine is going to open it up and meet you right there, right? But if the container is not ready to hold you, you might just actually harm yourself more than actually help yourself.
So this is a bit of a warning.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people think like, oh, I'm going to go, this is like the cure, the miraculous cure for everything. And it's not. I mean, it can harm you if you don't handle it properly. Yeah. You know, it's kind of like going and having a heart open surgery with a nurse. You know, like
there's a risk involved.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, the nurse is somebody who studied like 2-3 years for a particular thing, right? But she's not a surgeon.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Right.
You know?
You don't want to get heart surgery from a nurse.
Exactly. It's kind of like the same thing. Who do you want to go and see? So if you're having something that is not so challenging, you might sit with a nurse and it feels okay, you know, because you don't have anything major to go through and you get support and the nurse can handle up to a certain level, right? But if there's something bigger, then the nurse is not going to be able to do anything about it. They usually freak out. Yeah. You know, so I've seen people freaking out in ceremonies. Oh, you know, like the leaders, like I've been there. I'm like, they're freaking out for what's happening.
Yeah, that's never a good sign.
Yeah, you're like, okay, you know, the container is freaking out because things are coming out of hand, and they just don't have the experience to hold it. You know, so I think those are the pieces that is important to understand from a Western perspective. You know, like who are we sitting with? What we're receiving is not just a brew. You know, it's the culture. And therefore, you need to respect the medicine, the brew itself, which is the spirit, and also the culture. You know, there's this group in Facebook, it's called Ayahuasca. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I'm not sure.
It's
no,
like
I don't know.
70,000 people. I mean, there's a lot of people from all over the world.
Well, so many people these days are talking about ayahuasca and experiencing it in different ways and having mostly good experiences, I think.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, it's good. It's expanding in different ways. It's just like, how do we navigate it in a way that is respectful, you know, respectful to spirit, respectful to the traditions. The piece that I wanted to mention is like there was this movement, I think it started in Denmark, that is called Thank You Plant Medicine. It was a beautiful movement and it's still going on. So people started like, they requested people who've done medicine and had like, you know, changed their lives through medicine to like videotape maybe like a minute or two and like post it, you know, because they're trying to change the laws around restrictions for, you know, medicine in other countries and stuff like that and validate the healing processes, which from a Western perspective is beautiful, right? From indigenous perspective, from my lenses, it's a really tricky piece, you know, because first of all, it's only that movement, even though it's integrating plant medicine, it's only talking about the experience of white people or Western people. You because
Right.
for us, for me, it came a little later, but like for indigenous people who've been involved in this, the relationship is like you're always thankful to it. It's not something that, I'm going to be thankful now and I'm going to create this movement for now. It's like a day-to-day experience where you're like developing the relationship to sacredness. So like coming up to like, well, now I'm really grateful because he healed me. It only applies to like Western people, right? So again, the power dynamics are a little tricky.
Interesting.
The other piece around it, for me, my experience too, is that
you're saying that in the indigenous communities, it's a more a way of life. That's kind of how I interpreted what you're saying.
It's a way of life.
Rather than, because I think part of what you're talking about here is in the modern or Western world, we compartmentalize everything.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm going to do my spiritual practice. Now I'm going to go to work. Now I'm going to watch TV. Now I'm going to masturbate. And like, it's not integrated. It's not all seen as sacred. It's all these separations.
Yeah. That's why I was telling you the difference between Western ways that are like not connected to spirit all the time. I mean, there's moments that we're connected, right? Because there's not. Like, the spirit is always present. But the sense of disconnection because of how we like frame things, it's different from them.
Right. Well, I have a question about, like, you're describing this journey of taking ayahuasca.
Are we?
Oh, yeah, we're recording.
Oh, I forgot. Okay.
Taking this medicine over the years, is there a kind of process of like when you're first doing it, you're throwing up a lot more often, and then as you gain more experience, like what you're describing, you're kind of more clear and aware, and is it kind of affecting you less at that point?
You're what?
Like having less of an effect on your mental state, or?
No, you still have like a very strong, depending on how much you drink, but you still have, you still enter into the spirit realm. We call it pintas, which is like a visionary visual things, like you see things. They come in different colors and shapes and forms. So you're still stepping into it. It's just your system is able to handle it. So you're part of it. It's kind of like...
You're like not overwhelmed as much.
Exactly. Your body doesn't overwhelm so much. You might purge. At the beginning, usually it's just a way of like cleansing your body. You might not, depending on how your system is. If you haven't had medicine a while, you're being stressed and things like that, most likely you're going to purge because your system is kind of clogged up. It's not something like you cleanse once and that's it.
Right.
Like we still like go back into Western lives and we get stressed and, we eat things that are not so healthy. So, yeah, and emotional pollution as well. We get emotionally overwhelmed and things. So, but the more you do it, usually you drink it and it's a lot easier in the body. The body can handle it more. It's kind of like your vessel is expanding, and then you're assimilating the medicine more and more.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're talking about it's like a really important issue, like this medicine coming to this country and different cultures and the modern world and how we integrate that, how we honor it, maybe the flip side of that is like, how do we make it more accessible if it is going to help people? Yeah. It's like you want to be careful who you sit with, but I'm imagining you also want to invite people in who need healing.
Yeah, that's a piece that, at least for me, is very important. The accessibility to it, for me, comes from how much indigenous people want to share. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, that will be a disrespectful piece, which is like taking,
Like taking, right.
So coming to indigenous communities is like, hey, would you be willing to share? How do you want to share it? So it's like a way of inviting them and seeing a response rather than taking, which is a lot of the pieces, like, as we mentioned before, people who are not shamans, they pretend to be shamans. They're known as neo-shamans. They go there to buy medicine,
There's also the economic piece.
Yeah.
You go into a poor community, then you have money and...
Exactly. There's a lot of manipulation around it, a lot of power dynamics.
What would you think about if someone just gets on Google, gets on the internet, and they look up recipes and they make it in their home?
Oh, there's a lot of people who do that.
And so, but from your point of view, that's not the right way to go about it.
For me, it's disrespectful. The piece that I wanted to mention, we were talking about that, what I said, the plant medicine. Thank you, plant medicine.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So from a Western perspective, it's beautiful because you're being grateful to the plant medicine, right? And then from an indigenous perspective, it's like, how did you get the medicine? Where did it come from? Who provides you with the ways, the forms? How do you prepare it?
Right.
Like the indigenous rights of how it came about, they're totally disregarded. So all of a sudden, Western people are grateful to ayahuasca, and are you guys grateful to the traditions that actually provide you with the ayahuasca and the knowledge?
You could say, thank you, this person, this community, this
exactly
lineage.
So, which is the tricky part, that the Western piece, we're not fully connected to our ancestors, right? We don't really acknowledge where things are coming from. We always see them like as an individual piece. Like, we see this micro from here. You're like, oh, this is awesome. But like, we don't always think like, who made it? How did that happen? Where did it come from? How much effort did it take to be made?
I think that's such an important point.
Huge.
I think so much suffering, like think about the animals and the factory farming.
Exactly.
And we're not thinking about where things are coming from. Or like my iPhone, like the people that made it.
Exactly.
But we're in the system, like if I want to have a smartphone, I don't get a choice I don't know how to make it myself,
Exactly.
So we're kind of in this giant interconnected capitalist world where we are using our money to buy products, and we're ccmpletely disconnected from the process of where they come from, how they're made, the costs, the environmental costs.
So I guess that's one of the pieces that it's happening with ayahuasca tourism. And at least me, I'm an activist of, my lineage and, protecting the rights or, our practices. And that's a piece that we want to be able to hold it in a way that, yes, we do want to share it. And at the end of the day, we get to decide who do we share it with. Some people's like, oh, that's not yours. Ayahuasca is free. It's in the Amazon. I was like, yes, it is. But like, we've been safeguarding it for like so many thousands of years. And it's not just the medicine what we've safeguarding, but it's actually the forms, Because people go like, oh, I can just do it myself. I'm like, would you be able to do it if you had not known how we actually do it? Because people was like, oh, I can just drink ayahuasca and have a journey. It's like, well, you didn't know how to prepare it, right? Now, possible, okay, you discover it, now you can sit and prepare yourself. Why do you use drums? Why do you use rattles? Why do you use like everything that is an indigenous piece that comes to like how the ways we navigate medicine is actually our indigenous intellectual property, right? So it's that piece of like, okay, you feel you can do it yourself. Okay, do it yourself, but like, don't use our things. And then they go like, well, I don't know. It's like, okay, so then can you honor and can you, regard where it comes from, and that without these traditions, you would not know how to use this or how to have access to the spirit, right? So that was a piece that is important, always coming back to like, not just the brew itself and the medicine, but where is it coming from? Where are you buying it? Who is it providing it to you? What's the power dynamic around it? Was it provided or was it taken? Was it bought in a way that it was a transaction, that it was sketchy just because it's a poor country? They need to like make money because they're assimilating into the Western culture. So all those pieces around that, how do we approach it? It's so important.
Yeah, it's really complex and rich topic.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's huge.
What do you? My mind's this is a little bit of a different direction, but I'm thinking about something like cannabis. We were talking about that before we started recording. It's becoming, it's legal here in Colorado. It's becoming more and more common. But I kind of feel like some of the same principles you're talking about could apply, like a relationship with the plant spirit, and the way that you use it, and the way that it's grown, where it comes from, and how that could potentially be a very different experience if you approach it with kind of sacredness rather than as a consuming or recreational or trying to get somewhere else.
Totally. Yeah, I cannot really speak much about a marijuana or cannabis. Like, I don't do it much. I respect that it's just a medicine that my body doesn't really go well with it. But in a similar example, I can speak to about tobacco. I come from a tradition that we're known as tabaqueros. We drink tobacco, like liquid tobacco. We snort it, and we also smoke it. Those are part of the traditional pieces to become a shaman or to become a jachek in my communities. They're known jacheks.
What is the drinking, the liquid form?
What is it?
Yeah,
it's very intense. It's more intense than ayahuasca because it's a purging process.
Oh, man.
When you drink it, the spirit of tobacco goes into your system and pushes everything out. And then we do ayahuasca after. So once everything has been pushed out, then the system is clean for receiving the medicine. But if you're very toxic, it's, I mean, I've gone through like really deep processes where it lasted for like 14, 15 hours nonstop, where like I'm super dizzy, I'm like throwing up, I feel like I'm literally gonna die. And I'm like, please take me away, I'm gonna die. So it's intense. But the reason I mentioned tobacco is like, for us, I'm so sorry. So tobacco in Quechua is known as mapacho.
Mapacho.
And it's sacred tobacco, the way it's being cultivated, the way it's being dried up and like done. We do these long things that are called mazos, which is like a very thick, rolled up leaves. Yeah. We'll let it dry in sacred fire for a long while, and there's a lot of prayer that happens along it, and then we use it. So for us, tobacco has a spirit. It's known as the abuelo, or the grandfather, which is the same spirit from the fire and from the sun, and as the creation. And so in our experience, for us, tobacco is a healing medicine. And then in the West, because it's being abused, then it's actually a damaging spirit.
It's such a powerful example. So many people, it's the number one cause of preventable death is tobacco use. It's something like 400,000 people in America every year. I worked in an addiction center, so I got to learn a lot about these kinds of things. But yeah, tobacco is the number one killer and number one cost in our healthcare system in terms of substance use, which surprises a lot of people because we think about alcohol or opiates or heroin or whatever it is, and or meth or whatever. But yeah, tobacco is that makes so much sense to me. I mean, because people are smoking habitually, they're not doing it intentionally, they're not thinking about it.
There's no relationship to spirit. It's an empty form. And then the spirit, at least from our understanding, spirits goes back into like, okay, you're not respecting me, I'm not going to respect you. And like,
jeez.
it's that's how we see spirit works. And that's why for many indigenous, even here up in the north, like learning a lot from different communities up here in Boulder, and really understanding, our relationship to spirit is the most important piece for indigenous people. How we relate to spirit and how respectful are we to the spirit ways. And how do we maintain a balance, that is mutual. Like
right, a give and a take, a relationship. Yeah,
and it's not just taking, because the abuse, it comes from that again, taking. Like taking. I want more. And that, again, when you're taking, somebody has to let go. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We're not just alone. The more you take, other people lack. So it's impacting. Again, it's a lot of greediness around it and unconsciousness. And yeah.
Is tobacco smoked?
Yeah, we smoke it too. We don't smoke it the way here. We smoke it for ceremony and whenever we want to pray or whenever we want to cleanse our body, but it's not something that you're just like habitually smoking all the time.
That's interesting.
It's usually done in a very respectful way.
Do you see less, because the way you're describing, there's no addiction there. And most people think about tobacco, cigarettes, they think about you're addicted.
Yeah, well, but I'm not addicted to it. I love it. Do it whenever I'm in ceremony.
Right. That's interesting to hear.
Yeah. I don't think. I mean, there are some, of course, indigenous people who have assimilated a lot into the Western ways, and they're like smoking regular cigarettes, know. So they're getting into the habit as well of that, losing that connection. We have that as well. It's like that piece we're trying to like find a way to our own people like go back or like not lose their connection, Yeah. But that happens there as well. So
I wonder if there's been any studies on this. I'm just thinking out loud, but like tobacco is considered one of the most addictive, if not the most addictive substance. And to have indigenous cultures that engage with it in such a different, reverential, sacred way and not have the addiction piece, it's fascinating to think about.
I mean, my response to that will be just the relationship to spirit, Yeah. I mean, literally, it has a form. The spirit comes to you and, when you're open to that, the spirit realm, like you have a relationship.
Are you seeing that?
Yeah, it comes in different forms, different traditions. But yeah, it's an abuelo. It's an actual physical form of an elder person that comes to you.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
it's cool to hear that because it's so different than our normal way of thinking about things.
Exactly. Yeah. And that will be an elder, right? Like it's tobacco is an elder from the earth. That it's, I mean, if you keep adding up, like, where are we coming from? Like, you might have your family lineage here, but you keep going up to, like, everything else that exists, right? So somehow all of us were connected, right? But we all have families, you know, like, we come down to, like, a more narrow expression of who we are.
Yeah.
So Abuelo Tabaco, it's a grandfather, you know, it's actually the grandfather of you know, planet Earth in many ways. And how do you relate to that? You know, it's an elder that is present everywhere, every time. So do you respect it? Do you love it? Do you, like, really embrace it? You know, do you have a relationship where, like,
It's beautiful.
you communicate and listen? I think that's the biggest piece from, like, Western cultures. Like, we don't freaking listen.
We don't listen.
Yeah. I mean, even I include myself. I have a lot of Western pieces around, and sometimes I caught myself, I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Like, shut up. Like, stop taking so much space, you know, like,
Listening.
listen.
Yeah. It makes me think about listening. I mean, when I practice listening, you know, working as a therapist, it's a lot about listening, or meditating. You know, listening is a big, being receptive, being open. And it's like our own constant thoughts and to-do list and worries and concerns, like all that shit will stop you from listening in the moment. You're thinking about something else. You're not present, and it's hard because that's so habitual and it's so strong here, and we're not getting modeled that. You know, we're not growing up often with people who are able to really listen, and really hear and really see and really. Makes me think. Another thing I thought about when you're talking is coffee. I mean, coffee is an incredibly powerful plant that's also from that part of the world that you're from. Yeah.
You know, my relationship to coffee is not very good either. You know, on my mother's side, who's Colombian, you know, there was a lot of coffee ever since I was a kid. My relationship probably on my family system is abused it. And so I don't have a good relationship. But yeah, I mean, coffee, it's a beautiful plant as well, you know, and I think it's like anything, you know, even water. Like if you ever drink water, you know.
Yeah, that's interesting.
You also feel sick or bloated or heavy.
You can actually die from drinking too much water.
I think so. You know, like you can like get super bloated. You know, but yeah, no, I don't know much to say. You know, about coffee.
Yeah, I just thought of that.
Yeah, it's definitely addictive to a lot of people. The caffeine component, you know. At least my experience is just people are addicted to the rush. You know.
Yeah.
Where we want like to feel like hyper all the time.
I drink coffee too. I love it. But yeah, I wonder that piece of like that feeling of like, can I go a day without it? Like, you know.
Yeah.
And sometimes I do, but a lot of times I don't want to. I'm just like, it helps me regulate me, and But I try to think about that, like where it comes from. You know, fair trade, organic, all that. At least have some effort to honor that.
Yeah, and I know. I mean, it's been all over the world. I mean, different, you know, traditions, very old traditions, like, you know, Turkish or,
right.
I mean, that's part of their traditional practices, you know, in many ways. And, you know, there's these people who do, you know, like coffee reading and stuff, like very, you know, very mystic, very esoteric, you know, like very spiritual in their perspective. So even coming from that, I mean, I could say like from here, like I don't know much about them, but like seeing it, they do have a relationship to their coffee in a way that is different from other people, you know.
Yeah.
So there, I'm sure there is, you know, a lot of beauty around it.
Oh yeah.
That get missed, you know.
We miss it, and it just makes me think about like we get it in the to-go cup, and we drive through, and it's just or in the airport, and like it's so much waste with that too, and so much rush. It's the speediness, or faster, quicker, stronger, better. What would do you have any thoughts or advice if someone's listening to this and they want to explore, they think ayahuasca might be a healing, positive thing in their own life? Like, how would you recommend someone go about that? Or
well, I can definitely invite people to my community.
Okay.
But in general, I mean, I get this question a lot, and people, you know, when people are posting on Facebook, this is what I say. If you're going to see, like, if all of a sudden somebody invites you, you know, like something opens up, people are talking about it here in, you know, in the US, and you're like, oh, maybe I can participate, you know. The things that you want to make sure you ask is like, who are your elders? I mean, that will be my first question. Where's your community? Where do you come from? Even if it's a Western person, even if it's a white person who learned from them, if it's somebody who's holding a lineage, like a medicine carrier, they will tell you like, oh yeah, my tithes are this, or my elders are this, or this is my community. They might practice from different people too, but there's usually one particular community that hands you their medicine,
right.
That did the work to like prepare you, right? Most people who don't have that, they're like, oh, I just practice with different people. Like I don't follow any particular, or you get like, oh, I do my own thing. Those for me are red flags. It's like, what do you mean? Like, where do you learn it? Are you respectful to like, it's kind of like, you and me, we went to Naropa, and all of a sudden we're practicing and we totally disregard where we come from. And we're like, oh yeah, the university is a piece of shit, but I'm a good, I'm a good counselor. And there's like, where do you learn it? And then all of a sudden where you came from is like thrown on the garbage, right?
Yeah.
So when somebody says like, oh, I do my own thing, it's like, where did your own thing come from? Are you able to honor that?
Yeah.
And I mean, I get so triggered. Like, hey, I get pissed. I'm like, don't be an asshole. It's like honor where you learn it from. So that will be a question. Like, where are you coming from? Where do you learn it? And most people who carry a tradition will be able to tell you with no problem. Even if they're white, like they're not indigenous, they will tell you. It's like, yeah, I learned from these people. This is my community, and that's a good way,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and then take the experience. My experience, most people who drink with like ayahuasqueros, like or like shamans from these traditions, the medicine will be stronger than most other medicines. A lot of the medicine that is served, in my experience, somehow is the experience is being diluted, and it makes sense just because the person who's holding is not able to hold so much. So sometimes that's good for some people. They need to have like a softer experience, and it's okay. So I'm not 100% disregarding, but like if you really want to honor the tradition and want to have like an authentic experience and like a profound healing process.
I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah,
because I think here in this country, we don't think that we don't give importance to the person who's preparing it and holding it. We, like how strong is it? How much of this chemical or that plant? Or we're not thinking about the way it was made and all that. So,
and also how much you give. The giving process is a very individual, one-to-one, moment-to-moment experience. So I might give you some today. Next time I might give you less, or I might give you more. Like I'm as I'm holding the experience for you, I'm like deeply in connection with yourself, with your soul.
Right.
And in this relationship is where I get to see how much medicine you need from this particular concoction that I make. Because there's not like we cook it for about anything between 5 to 7 hours, and it's under a fire from wood. So it's not like you're regulating how much fire are you doing, and you're not checking the time. You're just like going with the medicine.
Feeling it.
You're feeling it, and you kind of like see the thickness, and you're like, okay, it's thick enough. This is what it feels, and then you stop it, right? So you have the medicine, and then that medicine batch might be way stronger than the one you prepared yesterday, right? And then you bring that, and you have to have a sense of what's the relationship from this medicine, that is my medicine that I'm providing to you as a participant, right? And that's one of the pieces that also gets missed with a lot of people who don't have experience. They kind of like give the same thing for everybody, or they kind of like it's like this major process that I'll give you half, and every time I'll give you half. That's your doses forever and ever. That might change.
Interesting.
As you develop more container, you might be able to take more medicine.
It's like this intuition that you feel and see what someone needs.
Yeah.
It's very different than the scientific approach of let's measure this many grams and what's your body weight, and the way I'm imagining like scientific study would be done in it.
Yeah.
It's like we lose the relationship piece you're talking about with that. But that's fascinating.
Yeah. So that will be. And
what do you think about how do I put this in the words? Developing like new forms or new ways of working with plant spirit medicine that are rooted in this country and culture, but are honoring the past, but are also new because we are in a different place.
I think that's possible, but it has to come from lineage holders. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
like, I'll give you an example. Myself, I hold my lineage as clear as possible, but I'm in a different place, you know. And when we're working with, you know, down in Ecuador, when we're working with people that are coming from different countries, we have our lineage and our clarity around how to work with the medicine, and also because of our relationship to spirit, we kind of double check. It's like these people need a different environment of how we are, you know, brought up, right? So we try to accommodate, but the way we accommodate is in response to the spirit realm. So we're always working in relationship to spirit. So even if we change a little, you know, it's based on the spiritual relationship, right? So for me, these ways, if these ways are changed to accommodate a different way of being here in the U.S., have to come from people who have a relationship with the spirit. And the new ways that might get created in a way to create a safety feeling for white people, Western people in general, comes from that relationship too. Because if you're just trying to like make I don't know,
make your own
thing based on a Western perspective, then you're like, you lost it. You know, like the essence of it is the spirit. So if you're not a relationship to spirit, what are you creating around it? What structure is coming around? Another Western structure doesn't have the essence, you know. So I'm not against it, but it has to come from people who are actually lineage holders. Could be either white people, could be mestizo, could be indigenous people that are working with white people or Western people, but coming from that relationship.
Beautiful.
You know, so
I like that.
I don't think a lot of people are fully. I mean, it's not like going to happen like 100%, but like, how do we navigate? Which is like the power differential. It's in both sides. You know, we're helping you, but we're not being taking away from our tradition. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And we still hold it. So a lineage holder is going to be able to do that based on the relationship.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's lineage. It's very similar I think in Buddhism, in yoga, maybe in a lot of different ancient disciplines.
Totally.
This lineage, this connection. So it's not something you're just cooking up from scratch.
Yeah. I mean, our traditions then in the Ayahuasca traditions and many of the traditions for us, they're known as verbal traditions when it comes into the practical piece. And then they're known as non-verbal traditions, which is the relationship to spirit. And these traditions have been passed down for generations and generations. I mean, our history down there, we speak about anything from like 20 to like 50,000 years old traditions.
50,000?
Yeah.
Jeez.
And of course, in the Western lens, it's only like 2 or 3 years or whatever, you know. It's like,
right.
You know, but I mean, for what we understand from our ancestors and the tradition that has been passed down, I mean, we understand it's pretty old.
I'm fascinated to look in my lifetime if some of the archaeology and scientific perspectives of the past shift radically. Because right now, you know, people are thinking people came to the Americas, you know, however many thousand years ago. But I think that, you know, that could change. Like we could just make new discoveries. Because like what you just said, some people believe people came here way longer ago. And we don't really know.
No.
And I think there's a lot we don't know.
Yeah, and I think there will be a lot that we will not know.
We might never know. But I was reading an article that the whole Amazonian rainforest potentially was created through the indigenous people that were living there and cultivating it and caring for it. And I just think that's so fascinating. They're finding 100%. Evidence for that. Yeah. I
mean, there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of what Western people would call them legends.
Legends, yeah.
You know, for us, legends will be another disrespectful way to address it. Because for us, they're actual tales of things that have happened, you know, like grandfathers keep passing it down, you know. So, because, you know, in the Western world, legend, it's something like, might be like a little made up kind of a thing, right? And so coming from our Western lands, a lot of the indigenous way of life and a lot of the indigenous lived experience, it's very made up for many Western people, you know, like we're talking about.
The word myth.
Myth.
We think it's not real.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, I'm talking to you about a spirit, right? So from my experience, this is my experience and it's real. You know, this is like my lived experience, you know. Many Western people was like, yeah, you're making this up, you know. And I was like, what are we talking about? You know, and then, so, you know, even using those words it's so important to balance that power, the power differential. Like, my lived experience, this is our indigenous lived experience, and it's real as anything else, right? So there's a lot of pieces around the sacredness in the south, in the Amazon that is still being guarded by indigenous people that are like super, super sacred. A lot of the treasures from the Incas, there's a lot of things that people talk about. The treasures are still like in many different places, and they're just guarded.
Oh, really? Yeah, they're like being hidden.
Very hidden. Yeah,
that's fascinating.
It's interesting in this place in the altar. This place that I told you. Yeah. I met when I was 12. There was this older person from Switzerland that came with his daughter. He was probably late 60s, close to 70s. He used to be a professional climber and trekker,
like mountain climber.
Yeah, kind of like that. And so there's always been a lot of researchers coming from different countries to this particular place in the Andes, because indigenous people say that that's where a lot of the Incas treasures are still. And there is a how would you say that in English? Sort of like a charm that says only those pure of heart would have access to it.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And there has been a lot of people that come
and they're
looking for it. And the interesting piece of this is there has been many groups that go in there and they die. They never come out. Like they disappear. They don't even find the bodies.
Wow.
So I met this guy who actually was hired by a group of foreigners from different countries coming to for this expedition to actually find the treasures. Yeah. But they came into the government saying that they wanted to do like a film documentary piece about climbing.
But they're actually searching.
Yeah, they were actually searching. And this guy, out of, I think it was like 20, 21 people that actually went up, this guy from Switzerland was the only person that came out.
Jeez.
And hearing, because I was 12 back then, hearing what he was saying, it's just like magical how people just all of a sudden vanished, and he was the only one who made it out.
They just vanished.
Yeah.
That's what
disappeared. Well, basically, he was saying he was like.
Did he see that happen?
Well, he was saying, walking, like somebody will be walking behind him, like he will walk like a minute or so, turn around, and it was gone.
Jeez.
Like all of a sudden, just like disappear from 20 people all around him, they're gone.
That's wild.
And so he started heading back, because he was saying what do you call that? The sands that are quicksands. So when they reached up to the top, it looked like a valley, beautiful. Yeah. So they started getting in, and the more they got in, it got really, really hard. Yeah. And then people started disappearing out of nowhere. And then he mentioned seeing some people actually sinking into the land and being swallowed basically by the land. So then he started heading back, running back. And by the time he made it back, he was the only one. So again, those are pieces that, at least from an indigenous perspective, I know there is so many different things that are hidden from our Western culture.
It's amazing that you met someone who told you that with their own words, rather than you didn't just read about it in a book. You actually met. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely people still out there trying to explore and trying to go to these places, and I know that some of them will get the indigenous people don't always want you coming in there, so they might not.
Yeah.
The poison dart arrows or whatever.
Yeah, there's a lot of. Yeah, as I said, the relationship to spirit is so deeply ingrained in the culture that
that's wild.
You might come in and there's always all these things on the spiritual realm that they work with to keep people away. It works to some extent. Also, you can perpetrate a spirit, right? Which is what happened with colonization. All of a sudden, they perpetrated the whole land and took over everything. So a spirit gets disrupted as well, but a spirit also can protect in many ways. So they work a lot with the spirit to do protections, for their families or communities, and keep, certain Western colonization that is still happening, transnationals coming in and taking the oil and the minerals and destroying their lands, and which is crazy. I mean, it's still happening. I mean, colonization is still it's a day-to-day phenomena.
It's disturbing to look at that reality that it's happening now. We tend to think about it something in the past.
It's happening right now.
It's happening right now. Yeah.
I mean, genocide. I don't know if you're familiar with Brazil, with Bolsonaro. This is a president from Brazil. I'm not so sure if he's fully mestizo, but he's definitely European in many ways. I mean, literally they're stepping into native territory with like bulldozers, like the big things. And if native people don't move, they just, well, actually they kill many indigenous people. Like they run over them.
It's terrible.
Like literally genocide, like killing
So
indigenous
disturbing.
people for the land. And this is just like the last year. I mean, it's still happening.
And they're clearing the forest, right?
Yeah.
Huge
I mean,
amounts.
for plantations and,
It's horrible.
you know. So yeah, I mean, this is not a past issue. It's still happening now, you know.
Right. I guess now it's happening from their own government of Brazil rather than from the government of Spain. But it's kind of the same thing, like what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, all the governments, you know, even in Ecuador, it's this place where like you're trying to navigate, but we have being westernized in so many ways, or, you know, like the structure of many governments that we have in South America and Latin America, they're very Western, you know,
Right.
guided, you know, and every time one government wants to not be Western, you know, or like, then they're like kicked out, like Cuba or Venezuela or all these places that are trying to come up with a different way of like managing their own economical system. Then, you know,
Then they get ostracized or destroyed.
it's a crazy manipulation of political things and money, and you know, so at least we get some protections. I mean, there is indigenous protection laws at least in Ecuador, a lot more than other places.
Oh yeah, that's good.
There is organizations that, you know, they're creating laws that are within the system, but it's balancing some of that power differential that it's always been more on down in South America is like the mestizo, we're the majority. So we as mestizo, we have to be very, very cautious as well how we walk, how we step into indigenous, like fully blooded indigenous territory, you know, because we also come from a very Western, modern life, and we're not aware of the spirit, we're not aware of the lives, and we do a lot of trespassing too, or we get bought, you know, money.
Right,
You know?
the money, of course.
Yeah, people come pay us money, and then we go and take land from indigenous people and damage them as well, you know. It's still a lot of corruption. So, but yeah, colonization is still happening, big time.
Yeah, I'll try to share some links and resources on the website.
Yeah. My website that I have is called Runa Ambi. Runa means people. Ambi means medicine. So it's RUNAAMBI. Runa Ambi.
.com.
Yeah, runaambi.com.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and my community is known, it's Cuya Loma, and it's in the Tena region of the Amazon, the Ecuadorian Amazon.
Great. Yeah, well, thanks so much for coming on.
All right.
It's a really
thank
rich
you.
conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk.
A lot to talk about.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you.
Really, really nice to share.
Yeah, I think great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you have found this podcast valuable, there are many ways in which you can support it. You can share it with friends and on your social media. You can leave us a review on your favorite podcast listening app. And you can visit our Patreon page, patreon.com/A State of Mind. For show notes and more information unique to each episode, visit astateofmindplay.com. And to learn more about my work as a therapist, meditation teacher, and coach, visit julianocean.us. And please don't hesitate to send me a message or email and let me know what you think and contribute to our conversation. Thank you so much for your support. It is listeners like you that make all this so very much worthwhile.